With no new Nintendo classics to talk about, and this month's PlayStation Plus titles already in the rearview mirror, what exactly am I left to do? Play catch-up, of course. You see, earlier this year, Ratalaika Games released an upgraded port of Final Zone on modern consoles. We also learned that Clear River Games intends to bring R-Type Delta back in an HD-boosted re-release with improved graphics and brand new modes. Huh, that's pretty cool. But are either of these games actually worth playing? And what about Final Zone 2, which was seemingly left behind? To answer those questions, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, the official US PlayStation magazine, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games when they first came out. Get ready to dodge way too many bullets, because this is another action-packed episode of the Review Crew. First released in the US back in 1990 on the Genesis, Final Zone was an isometric shooter from celebrated developer Wolf Team. It stars Howard Bowie, commander of the Team Undead unit of El Sharia's Foreign Legion. It's up to Howard to infiltrate enemy territory and destroy the weapons of mass destruction before they're used on innocent civilians. In other words, it's a RoboCop-inspired action game that was released right at the end of the Cold War. Let's go ahead and see what the critics thought of Final Zone. Believe it or not, there's a surprising gulf between the game's high and low scores. Let's start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, which just so happens to be at the very bottom of the scale, giving it a low average of 4.5 out of 10. Final Zone ended up being EGM's 17th worst reviewed game of 1990. That's right, 152 games scored higher than this shooter. Ed argued that there's something missing in this shooter. It's not for a lack of enemies or places to move to. Perhaps it's the lack of different things to do. After a while, the levels become predictable and the excitement of what's coming up next just never materializes. Steve liked the game even less, concluding that Final Zone has great graphics, but the main characters appear as though they're pasted on rather than interacting within a real universe. There's plenty to shoot at, but with horrible control and movement that, while visually pleasing, is tough to get used to, Final Zone ends up average. As we take a trip across the pond to the United Kingdoms, we see that there are actually a couple of different magazines that genuinely liked the game. We're gonna get to those in a moment, but first we should check in with Sega Force. With a score of 73%, they find themselves right in the middle, though their write-up definitely suggests that they're more in line with EGM than their British peers. Final Zone doesn't have the makings of a smash, because it gets a touch repetitive after a while. There ain't enough here to hold your attention for long. The control of the main dude's a touch shoddy, try holding down fire and changing directions. It's a nightmare. Scrolling's a touch shoddy during the first end-of-level battle, and the game slows down a little when a lot's happening. Not a bad game, although completing it won't give you too much brain strain. Now, when it comes to the highest score, there's a tie. Megatech couldn't help themselves, going all the way up to an 84%. That's the exact same score that you saw from Sega Pro, who reviewed it in their very first issue. Wear your Transformer-style Axis suit and walk the street to clear them of criminals. Various weapons can be used in this 3D blasting extravaganza. Great graphics and surprisingly addictive gameplay make for a fine shoot-'em-up. Although EGM wasn't that into it, the rest of the critics were, ultimately giving Final Zone a better-than-expected overall score of 72%. That said, buyer beware. This game has not aged well, and playing it in 2025 can be a rough experience. Your mileage may vary on this one. As it turns out, fans of Final Zone wouldn't have to wait too long to get their hands on the sequel, as Final Zone 2 was released the same year as the original. That's the good news. The bad news is that the follow-up landed on a completely different console, the TurboGrafx CD. While I'm sure that probably frustrated the dozen or so fans of the Genesis game, it did lead to a more cinematic game that was filled with all sorts of fun 16-bit cutscenes. Beyond the cinematics, the sequel added more playable characters and changed the gameplay to be less restrictive. Let's see if any of that changed the critics' minds back in 1990. So get this, Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed the original Final Zone in issue 17. They then followed it up by reviewing Final Zone 2 only 1 month later in issue 18. Guys, that has to be the shortest amount of time between sequels in the magazine's entire history. The good news is that they actually liked this more than the first game. The bad news, of course, is that EGM still wasn't sold on the Final Zone franchise. Ed asked an important question. Why bring this out on CD? Other than a few great intro scenes and intermissions, the game could have been done on a card. The game is much too short and not up to the high standards we expect from a CD game. Great voice though. Sushi X, on the other hand, was one of the only critics who actually recommended the game, giving it an 8. Final Zone 2 is another great CD game on the TurboGrafx. The graphics are great, the voices are excellent, and the music isn't dull and boring. The gameplay is fast, and there's a lot of action. The one complaint is that you can't keep moving while you shoot. Too short. Electronic Gaming Monthly ended up giving Final Zone 2 an average score of 6.5 out of 10, up 2 full points over the original. As we turn our attention to the competition, we see that GamePro largely agreed with Sushi X, giving the sequel a solid score of 4 out of 5. Let's ignore the factually inaccurate part of the review and focus on the fun pun. Final Zone 1 apparently never made it across the Pacific, but Final Zone 2's landed with a vengeance. If you dig action-packed land-based shoot-'em-ups versus overwhelming odds, go get zoned out. Now for the record, GamePro missed out on reviewing the first Final Zone on Genesis, which most definitely did come to America. I mean, unless they're talking about Final Zone Wolf, which came out in 1986. Anyway, with an overall average of 73%, the critics liked this game a little bit more than the original. This is certainly the better of the two, even if it probably didn't need to be on CD. When Irem first introduced R-Type back in 1987, pretty much everybody was won over by the great graphics, the amazing boss designs, and the atmospheric horror elements. They also loved the little force drone that could be placed in the front or the back in order to deflect bullets and shoot out special attacks. Fast forward 11 years, and Irem was ready to take on a whole new generation with R-Type Delta, the franchise's 4th installment and the first to employ 3D graphics. Spurred on by the success of Taito's Raystorm, Irem wanted to outdo that game with an even better and more impressive next-generation shooter, and the fans loved it. In fact, many consider this to be the high watermark for the franchise. But what about the critics? Did they love this PlayStation game when it first hit store shelves in 1999? For the most part, everybody agreed that R-Type Delta was a step in the right direction for not just this game, but all shooters in general. Let's once again start at the very bottom of the list and work our way up. While the notoriously grumpy Next Generation gave the shooter a score of 3 out of 5, it's actually computer and video games that I want to start with. If you've never played a game like R-Type, get ready for a tough challenge. It's full of colorful enemies, great sound and music, spectacular bosses, and dazzling weapon effects. But not everything's perfect. There's quite a bit of slowdown in some sections, and the arcade thrills means that once completed, the high score is the only reason to continue playing. Although the 3 ships add a little longevity. But if you're a shoot-'em-up fan, get ready for one of the best blasters around, where skill and reflexes are more important than combos and racing lines. They don't make them like they used to. Now working our way up the scale, we see Edge give the game a so-so 7 out of 10, while PSM went a little bit higher with a 4 out of 5. That's the same score that we saw GamePro give the game when they reviewed it. GameFan was even more impressed, giving it an 81%. And then there's Electronic Gaming Monthly, who went all the way up to 8.25 out of 10. Shu issued a strong warning in his review. You'll die a lot. Oh, will you die a lot. Set it on easy, and you'll still die a lot. learn the patterns, and you'll still die a lot. Get really good at the game, and you'll still die a lot. If you can handle pulling out all of your hair in frustration, and your family can deal with the inevitable cursing out loud at the game, then you have to check out R-Type Delta. John wasn't as into the challenge. I really like shooters, but to be completely honest, it's been so long since a good one came along that I'd forgotten how frickin' angry I get when a laser globule the size of an atomic particle tears my ship apart for the 7th zillionth time. That said though, the level design in Delta is excellent, and the graphics are beautiful, but it's a tough cookie to beat. Now, when it comes to the top score, the official US PlayStation magazine's got you covered. They ended up giving R-Type Delta a strong 4.5 out of 5, raving about more than just the presentation. What makes Delta truly great has nothing to do with how it looks. Like previous titles of the R-Type series, Delta is all about gameplay. The level designs are also unique and perfectly suited to the game. Sections where a giant walking ship approaches you from behind and you have to go under its legs as it plods forward, or another where you dodge giant twirling pipes in a broken down spacecraft are different enough from the usual shooter fare to keep you glued to the controller. If you've never enjoyed shooters, this game won't change your mind. But if you've ever got a sore thumb from a good shoot 'em up, even in the old arcade or 16-bit days, R-Type Delta is for you. Look, while not every critic was ready to jump back in the pilot seat for another impossibly hard shooter, pretty much everybody agreed that the redesign looks nice and the series still is a lot of fun. With an overall average of 76%, the general consensus was that both genre fans and those looking for a tough difficulty will probably dig it. Personally, can't wait for the HD boost. Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist with hundreds of these episodes. Check it out. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is the best final game? I'm specifically looking for a game with the word final in its name. You know, like Final Fight or Final Fantasy or Final Zone. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, look, I apologize for delaying the Super NES countdown, but I wanted to add a few more scores just to make sure that the averages are perfect. This is the big final episode, and I want to make sure that it was right. Look for that to debut next week. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.